I was asked to speak a little bit about smart growth. We've heard from the other presenters kind of the context for how smart growth is occurring. I might just try to use this. Try to save my voice. So, is that on? Yep. Okay. And really, I guess what I want to focus on in the next 20 minutes here is the third P of the sustainable triad, if you will, of people, place, prosperity, so the prosperity piece. And sustainability and smart growth really go hand in hand. Now, just by way of a little bit of background, smart growth basically that term originated in Maryland. Some of you, it's been around for close to a couple of decades here now. And I'll talk about some of the principles. So it's not something we invented here in Michigan, but we've certainly embraced it. And we could certainly embrace it a whole lot more with some of the things that I'll be talking about. I just wanted to talk briefly about the Land Policy Institute where I work. How many of you attended the summit last Friday here? So you're familiar with, we had several hundred people. But basically it's a Land Policy Institute, deals with this land, place, and prosperity science. One of the programs that I run is the Citizen Planner program that teaches the local elected and appointed officials on community planning, and is one of the elements of the Land Policy Institute. So if you haven't been to our website, there's a number of resources that are there along this topic. I thought it would be helpful just to provide some context here. When I was asked to do this presentation, I actually took a look at the chapter that dealt with land use from the state plan on sustainability, and here are some of the goals that were identified within that plan. Reduce density, low density development specifically, and by 2015, in a few short years by 25%, and then up to 80% by 2050. Encourage communities to utilize an infill approach for both new and redevelopment. Infill being basically projects that are areas that are served by infrastructure already that could be developed. They have the infrastructure in place. And then finally, work to ensure that at least 60% of new future statewide growth utilize more compact development or transit-oriented development, TOD, sometimes it's referred to. So noble goals, and really I guess I'm going to be touching on how we can address some of these three goals and how we have with some of our communities. Now, just in terms of the hit list, I'm not going to go through all these, but this is the official 10, and it's in your handout as well, of the Smart Growth, 10 tenets of smart growth. And a lot of these are just certainly make a whole lot of sense. And it's not like we just started doing these with the framing of smart growth. But what was unique about this is it did package it in such a way that made sense. And I guess the premise in Maryland where this started was, communities, you can grow. We're just not going to fund it if it's not smart growth, meaning transportation infrastructure and so forth. They backpedaled a little bit on that, but I think the premise is still there. To round out the top 10, really encouraging, taking advantage of that compact building design, and 10, which is often overlooked, making development decisions predictable, fair, and cost effective. It's interesting to note that a lot of the trends that have occurred nationally have really been led by the building community and the real estate community because of the sense that going from one community to the other, there's such a difference in how development is approached. A project could take as little as a couple of months in one community or 2 years in the adjacent community. So some of that consistency and predictability really becomes important. Now this idea of, when we talk about the three Ps, the third being prosperity, how does this smart growth fit into the new economy? One of the things that we're doing, literally hundreds of training sessions around the state over the next couple of weeks on the Michigan Prosperity Initiative. It's a large initiative. I don't have the time to really talk about it here today, but there's a 101, 201, and 301 trainings that are talking about some of this. But for our discussion here today, I think the key is that when we talk about economic development and smart growth in this decade, we're really talking about how do we retain and attract knowledge workers, and it really comes down to placemaking and smart growth in a nutshell. Because when we talk about what it's going to take a lot of the things that our previous two speakers were talking about: green spaces, pedestrian-oriented, a lot of those things that this group knows are important for sustainability. but has a different context now when we talk about sustainability from an economic standpoint. Now, there's the old economy, new economy, and I use that term, just kind of throwing it out here. I'm not going to go through all these, but couple that I wanted to highlight. The century we just completed, a high-quality physical environment was a luxury in the way of attracting cost-conscious business, whereas really now, physical and cultural amenities are key in attracting knowledge workers and those that are going to create investment. So it's much more important that our places become places that have vibrancy and are sustainable in many different ways. Also, when we look at the old economy, the quality of the environment was, if we're able to achieve it, great, but it was an externality that really was looked at as not something that was particularly important, whereas now clean, green environments, proximity to open space really are going to be an important driver. So it really does come down to building special places. Unfortunately, Michigan does not rank very high. Even some of our quality places that were identified here in Michigan on a lot of the indicators on placemaking and areas where the creative class wants to locate. And it comes down to transit-oriented development, having a lot of cultural amenities. I mean, we have a few communities, certainly, actually quite a few communities that have a package, but that are critical mass throughout the state. With 1,800 local units of government, we have a lot of opportunity, but it's not in a critical mass that is at least staged well to attract the creative class, with the exception of a few communities. So, how do we get kind of into this situation? Well, I want to talk about a couple of key elements here that really are changing. Those of you that did attend the Prosperity Summit heard from the author of The Option of Urbanism, that really, I guess, the mix of the type of developments that we have clearly aren't sustainable now from both an economic and environmental standpoint. And the key is that we were really focused on chasing the right mix of demographics. You could almost identify the corner where the next shopping center would go, given the demographic profile of the community. And we built into, with our local units of government, a lot of incentives for disinvestment, and it's just, quite frankly, it's been easier to build on greenfields. It just has. And you look at the incentives that are in place, they just haven't been able to match up with the opportunities to develop in green areas. Our downtowns have tried to emulate the malls in some respects. Some communities have done well. The resurgence in Rapids over the last decade and a half, and that public investment that was made with the Van Andel Arena, I mean, that was a game changer. And communities that have invested in some of these cultural amenities are seeing some of that. But downtowns can't shouldn't compete the same as the strip mall centers or the malls. And we've left a kind of a legacy of some of our downtowns that need some focus. And there's an opportunity now when we talk about sustainable principles to start tying that together. There are three types of redevelopment I just wanted to mention here, just so that we have the terminology if I use them. Gray fields, those are the areas that an old shopping center, perhaps, that could be retrofitted. This is actually where some of the best opportunities are for sustainable new development and LEED certified type of development. Brownfields, Michigan has had a very good program. We do lead the nation in a number of areas in brownfields and brownfield redevelopment. Historic buildings and so forth. So when we talk about redevelopment, actually we need different types of strategies for smart growth for each one of these, and they all present their unique challenges. So, I think some of the advantages are obvious for sustainability. The energy and the inputs that go into new development versus a reuse are quite extraordinary, particularly when we look at carbon footprints and so forth. So from that standpoint, indicators, reusing our existing stock is much, much better in meeting our greenhouse gas emission goals than new construction. There has been a trend, some might call it smart growth. I put a question mark in it, mall to lifestyle center. Those of you that are from the area here know of like the Eastwood Town Center. That would be considered a lifestyle center. Basically, the idea is it has some of those amenities that we talk about in terms of smart growth, walkability and so forth. Yet, unfortunately, in most of those cases, you still have to drive to them. In the case of the Eastwood Town Center, there's no light rail there. There might be a bus stop there. But I don't know many people that hop on a bus to go to the Eastwood Town Center. It's just too far out there. So we've developed some of these pockets, and sometimes this gets framed as smart growth, sustainable growth, yet it's not connected. And so we need to do better. I guess that's the challenge that I'm posing out there. We need to do better than that. That's really not sustainable type of development. It's in the right direction, but it's not connected in a way that really makes it green and sustainable. But one of the challenges that a lot of communities have is that this idea of thinking like a developer. And by that, what I mean is that we've enjoyed a tremendous amount of growth over the last 60 years that really all we had to do was manage that growth. You know, we could count on that 3 to 5 to 7%, sometimes 10% growth on an annual basis. And it was really about how we manage it. Well, now it really requires more of a proactive approach. And some of the success that Grand Rapids and Ann Arbor and some of the other cities had, they realized that they have to take an active role in redeveloping. And whether it's consolidating properties or coming up with new partnerships. And a lot of our communities, particularly townships, in my experience in working with our 1,200 townships or so, they're just not well equipped to think in those terms. So there's new partnerships and a new way of thinking that's really going to be necessary to make this happen. Now, some of the strategies for smart growth we've talked about highlighted these things. Mixed-use development. Unfortunately, still in 2010, a lot of our communities in Michigan, it's still illegal to do a mixed-use type of development or a commercial type of development. It's harder to do the stuff that the community wants than it is for the stuff that nobody wants, or at least not many people want. The strip shopping center, parking in front, no pedestrian orientation, no amenities, not connected with the surrounding neighborhood. That's the easy development. The mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented type of development is the tough development. It takes longer, it costs more, you got to get buy-in from area residents, and there's a lot of opposition because it's different. So, but this idea of property consolidation in particular, if you look at the one thing, and this was highlighted at the Prosperity Summit last week, communities have to take an active role in consolidating and dealing with the ownership issues of property. Because if the developer has to deal with that on top of everything else, it's just one more reason to go out to the green field. So there's a number of different strategies, but that's one that communities need to look at. Green development, you know, I know I'm preaching to the choir here in terms of the benefits and so forth when we talk about green development. But I think what is an opportunity, and it was mentioned, I think, in the presentations, it has to be integrated into the planning process. Not something that's a separate element, where the sustainability is a separate element. It has to be integrated within the process. I know I sit on my own local planning commission, and you know, I know it's tough. It's tough because we get developments before us, we have a half an hour to make a decision, and we're trying to figure out, we don't want to make the 100-year mistake, because that development's going to be around for a long time. Yet, all that work really needs to be done well before that proposal comes before the community. And that systems approach and integrating it into the overall fabric of what the community does. So, you know, there really is a lot of opportunity, and taking a natural systems approach to this, identifying what the true costs are. Oftentimes I hear, well, we can't afford to do it. And many times we would argue, if you actually did the math actually on what it would cost long term, you can't afford not to do it, because rain gardens and some of the other infrastructure improvements will actually save money over time as opposed to cost you more. Now, many of our communities, I just picked 3 issues here, but many of our codes are still based on this separation of uses. But when we talk about green development, we really need to be thinking about mixed use, commercial, housing, office, all together. You look at the creative class and those that are the group, segment of the population we want to retain and attract here in Michigan, this is the type of development they want. And we haven't offered enough flavors of that type of development here. that's really something we need to work on. Transportation makes transportation necessary for our type of development. It's really tough in Michigan to get from one place to another without a car, let's face it. Anybody said get on the bus, I try to. I try to ride my bike to work on occasion. It's a lot of work. It's feel like by the time you get to work, you feel like you should hold your hand up because you made it. You didn't get killed on the way. It's a lot of work. So having this really integrated approach, we're getting there. Greenways, non-motorized paths, safe routes to school, a lot of different programs, we're getting there. That's something that still there's a lot more work in Michigan. But quite frankly, given the spread out nature of our development, the fact that we're so low density here in Michigan, it is very difficult to create that critical mass to be able to make a lot of the public transit really financially feasible. And we've done some studies at the Land Policy Institute about, particularly over the last 20 years, on how the large school campuses and the group of the segment of the population that is perhaps most vulnerable is the youth. And I often ask folks, how many grew up in communities where you could walk to school? And most would raise their hands when I ask the local officials, elected and appointed officials, and I ask them, how many of you live in communities now that your kids or your neighbor's kids could walk to school? And most all don't raise their hand. In just one generation, we've gone from having a built environment where people could walk to one where it requires Jane and Johnny to be driven to school or put on a school bus out of the corner. And there's a lot of reasons for that and safety issues that we could spend a whole session talking about. But one element is just our location, about making our schools and our public facilities accessible and walkable. So we need to look at development both from three different perspectives, both the site, its connection with the neighborhood, and the region. We've talked a lot about site when you talk about LEED standards and so forth. That's really dealing with the site level. How does it interrelate with its neighborhood? There's the new LEED ND that begins to address that, how it addresses with the surrounding. But then within the region, how it all connects together. And we haven't done a particularly good job here in Michigan at the regional level of connecting. So those are some things that need to be integrated within the local community planning process. Now, when we look at a systems approach, we need to think about how developments fit in with the healthy design, both at a human scale. Harris and Susan talked about the renewable component of that, and the multi-generational transportation system. How are we doing for the elderly? How are we doing for the youth? What are some of those different opportunities? But it comes down to integrating it within our planning process. Now, there are a lot of different strategies that can be used. I just pointed out a couple here. First of all, the one document, you have to start somewhere. You can do a sustainability plan, but look at your master plan. Every community in Michigan that has zoning, 1,200 communities do, that zoning shall be based on a plan. That's state law. And in the plan is supposed to be the policy guide. What policies do you have on sustainability, walkability, and how are they being integrated into the capital improvements program, the recreation plan, other fiscal policies that the community has? So that's a good place to start. And as Harris mentioned, to be able to integrate it fully. You know you've achieved that when you have indicators for all your departments are all looking at this. You're all on the same page. It's not just one person in one office. So you can take some of those easy steps, starting somewhere. The program that Susan mentioned is wonderful. And really, I guess, start small and have some of those measurable milestones and objectives. That's really the key. One component, though, I really wanted to highlight in terms of some of the strategies. This idea of the 5-minute walk is really important. Those of you that have done walkability surveys and so forth know this, that try sometime timing yourself. You can walk a lot. Most of us can go a long way in 5 minutes. And I've been given the 5-minute warning, so I've got to do the walk in 5 minutes. Okay. But the idea here is that within a 5-minute to 15-minute walk, or a quarter mile to a half mile, if you're talking about having a sustainable and walkable community, That's really what you need to be thinking about within that 5-minute walk. And it's how most of our downtowns and communities were built around the turn of the last century. And we've gotten away from that, and it's something that certainly has merit when we talk about sustainability. A lot of our development, you can't get there from here. When we talk about connectivity and a grid system, it provides some of those other opportunities. Also, when we look at our commercial corridors, I think it's important for communities and residents to vision what can be done. You know, sometimes you can have regulations and so forth, but you got to give a visual. And this is where I'm really big on design charrettes, having that opportunity to really envision a corridor that looks like the one on the top, and what is possible over several decades to achieve. Similarly with density, you hear in Michigan, well, you know, density is a bad word, we don't want density. Well, some of it's the way it looks. Both of these are 8 units per acre. This is what most communities allow for. This is illegal in most communities in Michigan, having it so close to the sidewalk or road. Yet, when we talk about walkability and the porch, there's been a lot of research on how that really builds community fabric and walkability. And there's some hard research that's out now on actual density and the reduction of CO2. This was from Kent County. You can Google this study. It was one of the first back in 2005 that actually tracked where higher density versus lower density and what the impact is on CO2. Similarly with this connectivity, which I mentioned about the walkability. Looking at communities that have high walkability versus those that are more of the suburban, spread out, auto-dominated, have less in terms of impact. So again, having the community trying to visualize what can be done. This could be considered a typical shopping center park in the front, yet you could allow for some type of development that could start to create the walkability and infill. So there's some things that we can do to retrofit some of our existing development. Just some more visuals there on what can be done. So let me just jump ahead here and leave you with these 7 things, because I think we're just about out of time and we want to have a few minutes for Q&A. I think the first thing is make it legal. In most of our communities, we can't do the type of development that we want. Or we make it so difficult, you got to go through many more steps. I'm still amazed when I look at ordinances and see that the type of development that's identified in the master plan is not allowed. Connect the dots. Human health, transportation, parks and recreation. If you're all trying to achieve walkability, how are all these groups working together? Sometimes those dots aren't being connected. The systems approach, which Harris and Susan talked about, being able to figure out ways to measure that benefit, not just the cost. Lead by example. Start with projects. Success begets success. That's really key. And Grand Rapids is a great example of that. And it really will require a mindset change. So I guess with that, I'll turn it back over to our moderator.